So for those online, welcome tonight. We've got the privilege of having a chat tonight with Andy Rutter from the UK. I'm just going to put up a little, I'm going to share my screen here so you can get a look at Andy's farm. So just some rules for tonight. We're going to be recording this. You probably saw that message on the way in so that we can use it as a resource down the track. Pardon me. And if you've got any questions, just maybe use the chat function. And that way, if it's not something that I'm going to ask down the track, that you know, we can handle them as we go. But if it is something that I've already got lined up, we might hopefully cover that question off as we go. So so to start with, Andy, that's your farm there in Cheshire. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us a little snapshot of your journey to this point.
Okay, well, I'm a farmer's son, so I started putting units on cows when I think I was 7 or 8. So I've got 30 plus years of milking cows experience. I went to Harper Adams University, which was fantastic for me because it sort of broke a lot of preconceptions I had about what cows should be. You know, I grew up in the show ring, and going to university was very good about opening my eyes to maybe other options out there. I did a year out in Canada, so I got to see some different farms over there and a different way of working with cows. After that, I managed a farm just outside. You know, you guys, if you don't know England very well, Liverpool Football Club, just down the road from there is where I managed cows for 2 years, and then I got to work for Genus ABS, and I worked for them for 18 years, and 16 of those years I was the European sire analyst. So my job was heading around Europe and the UK, trying to find the cows to suit our systems and export systems for the sort of genetics they were looking for. And then back in maybe 2018, I got the opportunity to join partnership with my stepdad and mum and my sister. So the 4 of us work in partnership, milking, where we have about 380 head, and then about 350 followers that are reared away from farm. We farm around 300 acres here, so it's Cheshire, so we're in the Midlands again. You guys that don't really know England very well, if you drew a triangle between Manchester, so Manchester United, Liverpool, and Aston Villa at Birmingham, we're right in the middle of that, and we can grow grass really well here, but it's tough land to do anything else with. And the clue's in the title. Our farm's called Clayhanger, so it gives you an idea what the land is like. It knows how to get very, very wet, but we can grow grass even when we have tough times with droughts. We tend to keep growing grass, so we utilize that with some grazing through the summer, and then trying to get as much forage as we can to feed them that genuine 200-day winter that we have here. So you're Australian.
You had the best job in the world. I mean, being a sire analyst, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, you said you get to travel around and you get to kind of play God, and it's really good for your ego and all those sort of things. Why on earth did you give that up to do
I asked myself this quite a few times. I loved working for Genus ABS. I love being a sire analyst. You know, meeting the guys around the world. But there's something about I'm a cowman. I like working with cows, and I spend a lot of time talking with sales guys and farmers about how they should manage their cows and what sort of cows they should be aiming for. And I was like, well, you know, maybe I should get off my backside and see if I can do it myself. And I guess there's a bit of an ego thing there to see how good am I at being a farmer. Turns out quite challenging in some cases, and there's a lot of things that I've learned very, very quickly in a short amount of time. But I really, really enjoy working with cows. That's always been my driver. So yeah, there are some regrets, but overall, I'm pleased I made the jump. I'm trying to see what we can do with our cows here.
So you're in Cheshire. Tell us a little bit about Cheshire. I've been doing some homework and I found a few pictures that might prompt you a little bit. But
yeah,
tell us about your part of the world.
So Cheshire is it's a proper oldie worldy county. You've got a photograph there on the right hand side of Chester, which was originally Diva when the Romans, when they ran it. We around, and in fact, the farm itself is on salt mines far down. Nantwich, Middlewich, Northwich are the three Roman mines that used to mine the salt, and the Roman centurions were paid in salt back in the day. That's why if he's worth his salt, that's where the saying comes from. So here's has got a lot of interesting history in there. We're in what we call the Cheshire Plain. It's very, very flat here. There's you can see the Derbyshire Hills and the Welsh Hills around us, but Cheshire Plain itself is very flat, which is great for holding rain in. If you like a lot of rain, which maybe is not always the most exciting thing, but it's, as we said before, it's great at growing grass. And what we tend to find is it's dairy county. So you think about Wisconsin in the US, Cheshire is historically what dairy county was in England. And we had great, as you got there, that's the crew works. We've got a good railway system, which was great at shipping food around and bringing stuff into the area. We've got a lot of milk buyers. We've got a lot of processors all on our doorstep. So it should be the best place to produce milk, although we do challenge ourselves sometimes with our politics. I'm sure you don't have any issues like this in Australia, but buyers, aggressive vegans, all those sort of things, it all adds to the spice of life.
And there's a special sort of cheese made in your part of the world as well, isn't there?
Yeah, Cheshire cheese, which is great on a biscuit. It's not great for cooking with. So if it's a really strong, crumbly cheese. But you'll find around this area there's a real variety of cheese. And what we found in recent years as well is a big spike in interest as people become more interested in where their food comes from again. And like farmers markets, there's been a big spike in in dairy products. I've got some cousins that they run their own clotted cream company. They make their own custards and yogurts. Those sort of things are as people try to value add and try and grasp more of that profit out of the production. I've gone the other way. I was always told you either diversify or you concentrate on what's on your key part of the farm. That for me is how efficiently can I get milk out of my cows for as little money and make as much and try and grapple with the profit on that side of the equation.
Cool. So I mean, we've had in Australia we've had some a similar sort of a thing where traditionally we had most of our milk going into milk factories and then being turned into bulk products, commodities, the whole milk. But we've now got a deregulated industry, so we have more and more of these sort of smaller cheese type places and boutique products and farmers trying to do the whole value add thing as well. So are you seeing more and more of that happening in the UK?
Definitely. Yeah, the farms are tending to either get bigger or trying to do something a little bit different with as I travel around the world, it's no different to the UK as anywhere else. As people try to value, your profit is driven by how much you sell it for and how much you produce it for. So can you value add at that end is definitely becoming a part of it. A lot of the milk buyers though are really starting to drive now for welfare, antibiotic use. In the UK, in the EU, there's only Denmark that's better than the UK for low antibiotic use on dairy farms. But I know that our National Farmers Union and a lot of our milk buyers are very, very aggressive on trying to reduce that use, which sometimes makes it challenging, because there is an element of for care and welfare of the cow about where best to use those products. So I think sometimes it's all or nothing, and there's a little bit of a balance we need to make sure we get right. So
you mentioned that you've kind of got a bit of, or when we were talking before we started, you mentioned you've got a bit of a sort of a hybrid system between housing and grazing. Just explain how that looks for us.
Okay, so the weather that we get and the land that we have, if we try and extend our grazing, you would be just towing cows out of the fields, because it just gets so wet and boggy with the clay in there. So we have what we call a genuine 200-day winter. We can't turn cows out really before May, and October is starting to get the time where those cows are coming in and they ain't going to go out again until the new year. So we do give them access during those summer months to grazing. That we, as you say, we grow grass well, so we're trying to utilize it and take some of the cost out. But the business model is very much geared on getting a very good number of clamps full of high quality silage. Where our land is, it's so heavy that grass is really all we can grow. But we're very lucky that where we rear our young stock, we have a agreement with them, and they grow maize for us. They're the other side of the village, it's a couple of miles, and it's running sand, so it's completely different soils. So they would struggle trying to grow grass, certainly in this year, because it would be burning away after you got your first cut off. So that works really well with us on the maize side, and that means then that we give our cows access to forage, maize and grass silage right the year round, and some byproducts and buffer feeding, to make sure that we are getting the best out of our cows all year round. Now, I know there are some more grass systems, certainly we have some neighbouring guys, but it's not really the way our milk contract works and the way the farm works that we could utilise that. So we need to design the cow and our system to suit the land that we've got here, and that's what we try to do. Sometimes we do a bit of a crap job of it, but we try our best to take some of the bumps out of it, which we're getting better at, I'd say.
So what about employees and that sort of thing within your system? How many people have you got working to the number of cows that you're milking? Okay, so we've got nearly 400 milking cows here, and there's myself full time. My dad's really retired, but he's like the foreman. He'll drive around in his buggy telling everybody what they're doing wrong. It turns out I do quite a lot of things wrong. And then my sister, she does a lot of the all the book work with my mum. And then outside, I've got a full-time guy that does all the tractor work, and then there's three guys that do relief milking. So our parlour is a 2040 swing over parlour. Really, the best way of milking in there is one guy can milk by himself, but it's slow. Two guys will milk the cows. We'll milk all the cows well milked in under 3 hours, and wash down. We try and make it simple, and that if something goes wrong, we've got a way out of it. But it doesn't always work like that. What else? Yes, and then we have a full-time RMS guy. So I don't do any of the breeding. I do like the matings, but we have a guy that comes on doing all the RMS work. So he walks and chalks the cows every day, which is brilliant for me, because it means I don't have to concentrate. We'll talk every day about what we've seen bulling, but I know that when he turns up on farm, he's only interested in one thing, and that's getting cows pregnant. And he is. We've been really lucky with him. He's a dead keen lad, and that's all he wants to do. And we've been able to get really good reproduction results. Because we're very strict on how we look after the cows in terms of days open, that sort of thing. And then he's
he's bob on at getting the semen in the right place.
So we talked, you know, when we spoke a week or two ago, we talked about your reproductive performance. It's not too shabby. Give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch of what that looks like. Well,
you know, talk about our business before. When I came home, the key bit for me was fresh milk. Nothing drives. You know, we would talk about carbon footprint and all that things. Like nothing drives it better for us than fresh milk. So the key bit for us was making sure those cows are cycling and bulling properly. So yeah, we use a lot of sex semen, which is great because we have less calving issues. And then we're pretty hard on, you know, if they've had a tough time, we you know, keep an eye on those cows and make sure that they're cycling with pre-sync, off-sync programs. But currently, over the 12 months, we're rolling a 33% preg rate, which roughly equates to a calving interval of 365 days at the moment. Which everybody tells you that the Holstein's not fertile. I do strongly disagree. I think there are some incredible genetics out there to make sure you can get fertility in there. Plus, if you're pretty tough on and strict on how you look after the cows, like, you know, if I can do it, I'm sure some guys can do a much better job than I do. So we sell 10,600 litres per cow per year. So I'm not talking about extended lactation or anything. This is just milk sold per cow per year, which is again a metric. There's a KPI that I keep an eye on, and then that preg rate is what's driving our fresh milk. You know, I'm not getting massive yields out of these cows that keep, you know, give 17. You know, we have high yielding cows, but they don't give it over 500 days. They've got to do it in 305 days and then be calving back again. Because another part of the business model is then that we sell fresh second calvers. You know, we're very lucky that people seem to like our cows and keep coming back. So we've got to supply, you know, once we've got a market, we want to supply those guys with the cows that they're looking for.
So let's, you know, normally at this point I'd ask you what your breeding goal is, but we're going to get to that. We'll kind of flip this on its head a little bit, and so give us a picture of what the nuts and bolts of your breeding program look like in terms of things like sex semen, beef semen, conventional semen. Where does that all fit?
Yes.
And yeah, talk to us about how you're working out which of these second calvers you want to sell. How do you make those sort of decisions?
It's a good question. You know, when I came home, I took over a herd they were big cows. They gave a fair amount of milk. And we didn't have a very high replacement rate at all. The replacement rate was like 16–18%, which if anybody, you know, it tells you it's an old herd. There's a lot of old cows in there. And when I had a look at the genetic level of the herd, we were the cows were sitting in the top 65% of the UK, which, you know, isn't a great figure, and certainly something as a geneticist, I wanted to see what we could do to improve that. But what concerned me more was my young stock was also in the top 65 percentile as well. And there's no genetic progress, you know, from young stock to I could breed any of my top animals were anywhere in the herd. They weren't heifers, they weren't cows, they were, you know, they could be anywhere in there because we had no, you know, we'd stalled really. There was a lot of things like some of the bulls we'd used. You know, when I took over, my stepdad was just getting to retirement age and he was running stock bulls, which, you know, they did a good job of getting cows bred, but they didn't really leave us with much to work with. So I was very aggressive in the semen that I've picked, and then I was breeding. You know, the issue that I had with sex semen when I first came home was I couldn't get the bulls that I wanted to use. The best bulls out there were all conventional, so I just use a lot of conventional semen. I have a buyer for my black and white bull calf, so I'm lucky on that side. And then once I got a first generation through, suddenly my heifers were a mile ahead of where the cows were. So I could, you know, and sex semen was getting better at the genetic level, so I could concentrate on that younger portion of the herd to drive my genetic progress. And now we're sitting, the young stock now are sitting was close to the top 1% in the UK, and the milking herd is up to the top 25 percentile. So, you know, I've jumped my replacement rate up, but some of that was driven by, I had to, because I had so many old cows that I was taking over. But things like people coming to buy the cows as well. You know, our number one reason for cows exiting the herd is us selling them as cows, which is great, because I like culling cows when I make, or culling or selling cows, because I make the decision, not because she's stuck in a cubicle or she's flat out with milk fever, or, you know. And that's one thing that we've been able to control is getting rid of these deaths on farm. So it was a case of how do I design the cow to fit my system a bit better. You know, big cows are great to look at, but not great to look at here, because, you know, the parlour's only 4 or 5 years old, so I want it to last another 20 years. So if cows are starting to get too big in the parlour today, well, how big are they going to be in 20 years' time if we don't put any control on that? And cubicles, you know, some of the cubicles are now like 40, 50 years old in terms of the size. So again, you know, cows that have to live in straw yard, I can't afford to do that anymore. So we've got to have a cow that can fit in every cubicle and can compete at the feed trough, because everyone tells me that big cows are the big bullies and they look after themselves better than anything else. You come and have a look around my herd. I would argue strongly it's the small cows that know how to look after themselves. The big useless lummox like me get knocked down and get stuck, and they don't like showing heats and they scrabble around. And so it's a case of getting that balance right of the sort of cow that I needed to fit my system. Plus, you know, they don't get stuck in the mud quite so much if they're a bit lighter. I'm just pulling it like that.
So what's that split looking like now in terms of sex, conventional and beef?
So beef now is 50% on the milking herd, and probably I sit around 30% sex and 20% conventional on the herd. Now, I've got to be honest, in an ideal world, I wouldn't be using any conventional semen, but there's still an issue, certainly with the youngest bulls coming through, that they don't get put on the sorters, you know, with any company, and you can only get conventional. And I guess sometimes my desire to use them, but, you know, that's my thing. You know, I don't play golf. I don't fly planes or have the expensive cars. I like I like getting excited about high genetic merit bulls. So using conventional bulls is no issue for me. On the heifers now, so the first couple of years, my heifers were so far ahead of my milking herd that everything in the young stock got sex on them. Now it's got to the point where my lowest young stock are a similar sort of genetic level as some of my milking cows. So the bottom quartile of my young stock at this point have been getting Aberdeen Angus. So we use blue on the dairy herd. That's what the market really pays you for. But I don't like getting blues out. You know, we use very easy calving. Touch wood, you know, and there's a couple of bulls we've used blue wise, and I've pulled 3 or 4 bulls in the last 2 years. I like it when my calving aid gets rusty, so that's a good sign. And then, but I do use Angus then on my young stock, just to get that easy calving. The value isn't quite in there. What we've got in the UK is a lot of supermarkets telling us how much the customer wants the Angus steak and all this, but then nobody pays for it. So it feels like a bit of a false badging at the moment. And then all those decisions about who is in which quartile was based on parent average historically, because of where my herd was. I didn't feel like genomic testing my females was the cost of genomic. You know, you think about return on investment. The cost of genomics for me is to justify it, I've got to change decisions. And if I'm just genomic testing and saying, yeah, they all look great, and I'm not changing anything, it's costing me a lot of money to do nothing with. So I'd rather at that point use parent average, which gives me a fairly good level of indication of where those animals were, until I've got to this situation now where I want to be more aggressive now because I think I'll have more of a spread of those females coming through and make decisions maybe earlier on even to the point of maybe not rearing some of those young stock if I don't think they're going to fit with what we're looking for, and then breed that top 3 quartiles in the young stock to sex based on genomics rather than parent average. But it's got to change enough decisions to have done that, you see.
I think that's a sound piece of advice for anybody, isn't it? That there's no point having those genomic results and just looking at them and saying, well, gee, she's good and she's ordinary, and not actually taking the next step and using those results to change your management, is there?
Correct. I remember speaking to farmers, and my question was, if you have a heifer out of your best cow and her genomics are really poor, would you still breed that animal to black and white? And vice versa, if you got a heifer out of a cow you didn't like and she came up with the highest genomics, would you then breed it to black and white instead of beef? And if the farmer says, I ain't changing my mind, then don't genomic test, just buy the best semen, because you ain't going to change your mind. You need to make change enough decisions to make, that's a lot of money to me. People talk about it being only whatever it is, 17, 18 pounds an animal. That's a lot of money when you start to add it up. And I need to have I'd be better off spending it on more expensive semen or buying a new cubicle if I'm not going to do something different with that information.
Yeah. Now you mentioned blues, and I wanted to talk about just your beef bulls and how you select them. But are they? I mean, we're familiar with Belgian blues down here and all the wonderful calving difficulties they bring, but I'm not sure you're talking about Belgian blues, are you?
No. So it was what we call the British blue, really, and they're all progeny tested, so they have calving survey. I don't get excited about pictures of beef bulls. I've never really got that excited about bulls. I was always told, well, if you take a girl out, you don't look at the dad, you look at the mum. And I always thought that was the same with bulls. Anyway, I'm jumping around. That's not very scientific. But my blue work, the number one criteria for me is calving ease. It doesn't matter how fancy that calf is. If I've had to put the jack on, I've impacted that cow's ability to peak yield, to get back in calf, or even to make it to the end of the lactation. So it's key for me that there's no issue at that calving. I like lower gestation animals for a number of reasons. Normally, you think about it, beef tends to get used on animals that are starting to, towards the end of their chances of getting bred back. So if I can tighten the calving interval of it, that's one thing. It also means they're back in the herd faster with fresh milk. And calf quality, in terms of the finish of the calf, would actually be further down the list. And there's new scores coming along that I really like. We talked a little bit before about efficiency. There are beef bulls that flesh more efficiently, which I think is a great trait for that finisher and to be able to take those genetics on. But the moment, when I talk to the buyers, they don't give two shits about it. They don't care about, they don't believe that. They just look for a calf with the biggest arse, and so if that's what they want, that's what I'll give them after I've made sure I've looked after my cow. But yeah, I wouldn't use the Belgian blue because it is a breed within a breed, and that's definitely not the way I want to go.
You like your cows too much.
I do, and I really, I struggle a bit now with arthritis, and getting a calf out is it used to be a bit of a bravado thing. It definitely isn't, and we're very really lucky. We have, I think over the last year we've had maybe one vet intervention that we couldn't sort out ourselves. So I want to keep it that way. I don't like paying for extra vet also.
So tell us what you were confronted with when you came home. You've sort of kind of alluded to this so far. You've come home and you've got this herd of big cows that, with a low replacement rate and those sort of things. Give us that story, that picture of what you were confronted with and how you have changed that cow so that it fits into your system now.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say I'm very, very lucky in that when I came home, my stepdad, he is a renowned breeder. He bred, a cow that won the National Holstein Show over here a few years back. People know it. He had fantastic sales, and it was great for that sort of cow. Obviously, towards the last couple of years, when he was starting to retire, he was being less aggressive with the sort of genetics that he'd used then. I was very lucky that when I came home, he said, right, you're in charge now of the breeding. I don't care. You just get on with it. Now, he says he doesn't care, but we do have the odd discussion about various things. But he was like, you make all the breeding decisions going on. And it's been, I wouldn't say that he would have bought into maybe all of my ideas straight away, but it's been quite interesting that as he still travels around, visits other farms, and he was across to a farm that had won the national herds competition, if you like, the Gold Cup in the UK a few weeks back. And he came back and he said, he's talking the same as you in terms of size of cows. And, you might be onto the right thing here. And I thought, that's great. I'm fine. I'm happy that he's sort of finding out, maybe his own way as well, which is great. But so the cows that confronted me with, the one thing that I found was they were what you would call the old true type model based animal. They had hard spines, they had great udders, they were big, framey, open animals. I took on all the feet when I came home, and I did find that we had more lameness issues than I was excited about. So that was something that I wanted to improve through trimming, but also could I improve lameness anyway through a genetic level. The other thing was Dad was very comfortable with cows that would give, heifers that would give 6,000-7,000 litres, because they would go on and make more milk as they got older. And I don't like that. I don't like animals freewheeling too much. They cost me so much to get them to carve in. We rear all our young stock away, so once a month I get a bill, so I know exactly how much all of my young stock costs. It's not like they're thrown away in a field to the side, and people forget about how much their young stock costs. I know exactly how much they cost me, so we're very focused on carving it 2 and under. But then you think about it, that's their student overdraft, then they have got to pay off, which I'd like it paid off in that first lactation, really. And if she's doing 6,000-7,000 litres, she's not going to do it. And so I put a lot of emphasis on driving production up. We're paid on a liquid contract, the contract that we have at home. They talk about they want fat and protein percent, but they don't pay for it. So what I do instead is I breed very aggressively for kilos of solids. So I know that if we did ever change contracts, pretty much all the contracts out there now would pay more for percentages. So I need to make sure the animals can respond if I change diets or any of those components. But a lot of emphasis on kilos of solids. And then initially it was trying to take size out. We didn't have a feed efficiency score in the UK when I first came home. I knew there was one coming, but the proxy trait would have been maintenance anyway. But that was the one thing that I put a lot of emphasis on was taking size out of the cows. And in the UK, we have a lot of true type enthusiasts that would tell me, it's all about the balance of the cow. The cow needs to be, not too frail. I just don't call frail cows here. What people forget is we've moved what the base is so significantly that it would take us so long to get those animals to be, people think if you use a negative stature bull, we're going to end up with jerseys. We'd have to breed negative stature bulls for the next 20 years to just get back to where we were to begin with, which is still bigger than a jersey. So I do worry sometimes about the chat in our industry over here. And then a lot of emphasis on the fertility and the lameness traits. Those are the reasons that the cows leave the herd that I don't have any say in. She gets chronically lame, or she just wants to see the AI rep every 21 days. She's going to exit the herd, with or without my blessing. So
So you're looking for a cow that is a smaller cow, a higher producing cow, a longer lived cow, an efficient cow, a healthy cow.
Yeah.
So, you know, as you would know, that recently, you know, AHDB in the UK introduced their EnviroCow index.
Yeah.
I mean, all of those things that you've been putting emphasis on in your breeding program are kind of all the things that are in that new EnviroCow index, aren't they?
Yeah, and it was interesting because which I talked a bit about feed efficiency. Feed advantage is the score that we have in the UK. So I put a lot of emphasis on maintenance as my proxy trait until feed advantage came along, and then put the emphasis on feed advantage instead, because that pre-selects for maintenance anyway as part of its breakdown. And I've got to be honest, I hadn't really spent a lot of time sitting down and looking at EnviroCow. I thought it looks fine. You know, I was so focused on the traits that I was looking for. And then this has been a really good exercise, because when you asked about EnviroCow and Marco was chatting to me about it, I started to break down the bulls that I was using and my goal traits. And I really should have just used this in the first place, because this is pretty much selecting for the traits that I'm looking for. You know, it's got a big emphasis with PLI, which is profitable lifetime index, which is what we've talked about. You know, improved fertility, improved longevity, reduced costs through mastitis and lameness. But then a big punch on getting production up and getting efficiency up at the same time, because you've got to be very careful if you just drive. You know, the most efficient cow in terms of not giving any emissions away is a dead cow, but she doesn't give you an awful lot of milk. So it's, you know, sometimes some of the indexes you see are driving about, they talk about the herds of cows and what the average is doing. What we need to do is think about those cows are all, you know, your herd is your a group of individuals, and are you doing the best for all of those cows individually to drive that index down. Now, because of our fertility here, and we're getting a lot of milk out of our cows, we do carbon footprinting with our milk buyer, and we currently sit in the top 7% of low carbon emission, carbon footprint herds in the UK. I'm not happy. You know, I'm aggressive. I want to be higher than the top 7%, but it's interesting about how some of that information is put together. A lot of it, I'm not oversold on how that calculation is made, because some of it doesn't take into account the true efficiency of the cow. It's just, you've got a Holstein, this is how much it's worth, and you know that's not really the case, because even within the herd we know there's differences between 1126 and 3946, you know, in terms of how efficient those cows are.
So in Australia, we're just introducing our sustainability index, and it's very much along the same lines as what you guys have got in the UK, because they're both emissions intensity focused. So yeah, we're kind of attacking the problem from both ends. We're trying to ramp up the production and at the same time increase the efficiency, so drive down that maintenance cost, so that you're getting that greater production over methane thing happening effectively, aren't we? So we're on the same trajectory, I think, in terms of where the UK's at and where we're at in Australia. And similarly, as you said, with your PLI and EnviroCow having a high correlation, we're seeing the same thing with our BPI, our economic index, and our sustainability index. So do you think that, you know, people are going to kind of select for both indexes when they start to get comfortable with EnviroCow over there?
Yeah, I think there'll be a stubborn element of UK farmers. I'm sure you don't have anything like that down under, but would say, well, I'm breeding cows that are going to give more milk. I don't care about, you know, sustainability. And in effect, you know, if you EnviroCow is actually profit because, you know, we can talk all we like about emissions, but at the moment I don't get paid for it. You don't get paid for it. It'd be great in the future if we can drive our emissions down, and certainly I can see the milk buyers starting to become more aggressive about it. But in the short term, what it's saying is I'm making a cow that is more equipped to turn my raw product of grass and byproducts and maize into something that I can sell down the farm drive. You know, if I make cows smaller and they give more milk, they are more efficient, because cows got to eat about 2% of a body weight every day in dry matter just to stay alive. So my daughters up there, you know, they eat a lot less than me just to stay alive, and you could say they're far more productive than me. So it's a case of how can we do the same thing with our cows? Can we? And I've got heifers at home now, but I give it, you know, we said, you know, we were getting 6,000 or 7,000 litres out of our heifers. We've got 2-year-olds now that are much smaller than those animals that I had before, that are giving 10, 11, 12,000 litres as 2-year-olds. And if I can get that milk sold per cow per year up to 11,000 litres per animal without losing anything else, that's absolutely what drives my profit up. And EnviroCow, by whether you say it's direct or you know, just going on in the byline, is giving me those sort of animals. You know, as I said, I hadn't selected on EnviroCow. I put my own criteria in, and it just happened that it correlates very highly with the bulls that I'm using, and the heifers that are really impressing on farm who they're sired by.
So I've got a question from Majid. So we might attack that now, and we'll circle back to a bit of carbon stuff again in a minute. But Majid's asking, and I know he's asking this question because he's a researcher down here doing looking into survival at the moment. So his question is, what's your idea about angularity and selecting for angularity? And I suppose how's that changed? Because I mean, I'm a little older than you, but we both come from that era of, you know, the wedgie dairy cow and angles and, you know, and all that sort of stuff. And you look at today's cows and they're, you know, they're a bit of a different creature to what we were taught that we needed to be selecting for. So give us your thoughts on angularity. Where does it fit in? Does it have any relevance?
Well, I'll answer the relevance bit at the end. I think angularity has had a really interesting journey with the Holstein cow, because if you go back, you know, when we first started selecting for genetics, you know, for milk, especially, you know, think of the history of the UK. We had a dual purpose Friesian, and we crossbred to the Holstein. And what did the Holstein do? It brought a massive injection of milk in there, and it made them big and dairy. So the correlation between milk production and angularity was fantastic. And we definitely saw that. You know, you see those fine open wedge, that was a precursor, a predictor for improved yield, which was great, and it did exactly what we wanted at the time. As time went on, and then I was very lucky at Genus that when I was working as a sire analyst, all the health traits came, and I really bought into them. You know, they were definitely something that I was empowering farmers to make more cows that were more robust and more profitable. Those health traits came along, and they said, we don't like angularity at all. You know, if you make cows angular, they don't like sex, they don't like getting bred, they don't like holding, they don't like surviving. So suddenly there was a nasty correlation with all of these health traits and angularity. And now feed efficiency and maintenance comes along, and it says, actually, if we make our cows more angular, we take weight away from the cow, and we make her, you know, a lighter cow, so she has to eat less to stay alive. So it's almost coming back into vogue a little bit in terms of the size of the cow. In terms of its relevance, and this is where I would probably fall out with some of my co-farmers in the UK, is I don't look at type traits anymore. I couldn't tell you a linear of any of the bulls that I've used pretty much since I came home, because it's twofold. I've not called a cow because on how she looks since I've been home, and I knew from my previous life that the studs have such an impact on what bulls get into the brochure anyway. You'd be hard pressed to find something that was a disaster on type anyway. You know, we've significantly changed the animal so much, and we're so far ahead with base changes hide all the progress that we've done. You look at the last 20 years of base change on type, you know, udder composites, even a negative udder composite today would be highly positive from 10 years ago. So I just don't look at them, because it's not making me any money. And people say, well, you know, you've got to have good looking cows. My argument would be that if you walked around my cows today compared to 5 years ago when I first started thinking about coming home, I actually think I've got a better herd of cows in terms of udders and legs and feet. And I've not selected for it. You know, I've selected for traits that make the cows more productive and hopefully stay in the herd longer. You know, so, you know, form follows function. And, you know, if I've designed the right cow in terms of how it survives and produces, then she's going to look like how she looks like. And I'm pretty happy with how she looks like at the moment.
That was exactly the phrase that came to my mind was form follows function, and I think we're seeing a lot more of that these days. And I agree. I think I wouldn't say we've fixed type, but I think we've come a long way with type, that you can probably can take the foot off the pedal a little bit and focus on other things, and then those other things will then kind of impact or somewhat determine the type to some extent as well, and it won't be a bad result.
Yeah. No, carry on. I know the argument about breeding for type. It's like I want to breed this type of cow because I think she'll do this. Instead, breed for the cow that you want it to do, and she'll look like how she looks like. And it's not popular. It was never popular when I spoke to sales guys about this. You know, at Genus, you know, I understand that, because it's not selling a fancy looking Ferrari anymore. It's trying to say, you know what, a Volkswagen or whatever it is, or, you know, Toyota does the job, you know, and in fact, it does it much better. It's more comfortable. It's, you know, it's more efficient. You know, I'm using all the wrong analogies, but you know what I mean. It's a case of trying to pick what you need to fix first. And that, you know, I needed to fix a lot of things. So type, you know, if I started putting some emphasis on type, I'd just be taking emphasis off the things that I really needed to improve first.
So circling back to carbon, I mean, you said earlier, you know, we're not getting paid or taxed as our Kiwi friends, our Kiwi friends are staring down the barrel of. But what are the things driving the carbon change in the UK? Is it the government? Is it the banks? Is it the milk processors? Is it the consumer? What's the thing that's dragging people into this space?
That's a really good question. I think there's an element of all of those parts. You know, for me as a producer, I want to get my, you know, because I know that we're having an impact. So can I be more efficient? Can I reduce my carbon, but not at the expense of destroying my business to do it? You know, can I have issues with, there's big companies out there that talk about carbon offsetting. You know, if I struggle sometimes with the concept of that, because it's a little bit like saying, I'm going to give money to cancer research, but I'm going to keep smoking because, you know, they'll even out. Well, they won't even out because you're still smoking. So and there's a lot of money involved in some of those industry, you know, behemoths that are saying, you know, if we do this, everything will be fine. And they're doing a really, really good job of telling, I was going to say educating, re-educating the public that they're doing a good job. And I think our government is a mess anyway, but I think they're kind of stuck. They don't really know what they want to do. They want to look like they're doing a good job, but as they start to look into the fine print and we start to come into a more what would I say, challenging financial situation in the UK, all of this drive about let's get our carbon footprint down is suddenly let's make sure that we're driving jobs up and people can survive. You know, we've got a living. We talk about a living crisis over here at the moment because inflation is astronomical on food. Well, people say how big inflation is, you know, in the public. Like for farmers, inflation on a lot of our products is hitting 200%, which is a lot of money, you know, a big difference in terms of cost. So I honestly don't think the government really knows, and it keeps getting drawn around by very active environmentalists that maybe don't really are only driven by environmentalism rather than sustainability of keeping people alive. You know, rewilding is like the big thing at the moment, and rewilding looks great on paper, but it doesn't feed a lot of people. And when we're in the situation that we are, where we're open to things like the war in Ukraine and those sort of things, because we're only 67% self-sufficient. And then they're telling us to rewild more of the land. And meanwhile, building is going on, taking some of the prime agricultural land away from our ability to feed. And then they say, yeah, and we want you to be welfare driven and produce less from your animals. And all of these things don't go together very well. So I don't think there's a very good holistic approach. And then the general public, if you follow social media, it's farmers are disasters. I don't know what they've been doing for these last 10,000 years feeding us, but it's disgusting and it's got to stop. And then the general public, the guys that aren't on Twitter or social media say food is too expensive, we can't afford food, we need cheaper food. So none of those things go together. So as a farmer, it's just a case of sometimes you just got to batten down hatches a bit, and what can I do to survive? Or as my mum would say, lose less money.
So you said before you are doing some carbon accounting at the moment.
Yeah.
What is that? Is that just you being interested in that sort of thing, or is that to satisfy a particular requirement for somebody?
So our milk buyer started doing carbon footprint. So we moved from another milk buyer just before I came home, who were they carbon footprinted us every year, and it was going to be part of their payment structure. Now that still hasn't come into force. So whether they were gathering information or using it as maybe a carrot and stick approach. Anyway, the new buyer has started carbon accounting for us, and they do all the calculations for us. And as I said, I'm a little bit shady about how accurate that truly is, but at least it's a benchmark and a starting point. But then I find that information interesting. I'm like in a farmers WhatsApp group all up and down the country and over in Ireland. So we sort of share these figures about, what can we do better or worse on that. And they all have different milk buyers. Some of them are talking more and more about they want it to be part of the process. But again, milk shortages this year have seen our highest milk prices, if you don't take into account inflation over the years, the highest ever milk price at the moment. So the milk buyers at the moment say, you know what, don't worry about that, just produce milk. So it's this mixed messages, which is always difficult. And that's why you want to empower your cows to respond when you need to change. That's why I put fat and protein into my cows. I don't get paid for it today, but I know that if I change milk contract tomorrow, I'll need cows that will be able to respond to that, and they need to be able to do it quickly. So it's the same with this carb. If they come and say, right, we're really going to start driving this down, I want to have the cows in the right place to say, you know what, we're already doing this. So we're already halfway there. So
you were ahead of the game with the EnviroCow index. Even before Marco had introduced it, you were using EnviroCow, but you just didn't quite know.
Lucky.
What are those? So you've got the breeding side of things covered on the farm from a carbon perspective. what other things are you doing or considering doing on the farm to try and reduce your overall? Now you've got a picture from your milk buyer. What are the things that you're picking up out of that picture that you think you need to maybe look at on your farm to try and reduce that footprint?
Yeah, so we've looked at alternatives to soya. That's one thing that's quite emotional in the UK. You've got to be a bit careful, because obviously the human accessible part of protein to soya is only a small percent, and there's an awful lot of byproducts that humans are rubbish at eating, but ruminants are brilliant at. So it's a case of working with sustainable soya production farms, which is something that our mill is interested in as well anyway. It's also things like utilize. What we're trying to do now is not, I like to get more and more milk out of the cows every year, but at the same time, margins is what's the saying about turnover for show, vanity. Turnover is vanity, profit for sanity. That's the, so it's, can we get that margin improved? So we're looking at more byproducts. We have byproducts that go into the brewing industry, that goes into our ration, and we started using some enzymes to unlock the lignin in our grass silage and maize silage, to try and make sure that we're getting everything out of it, driven more and more litres per ton of forage, rather than just being picked up by the blend that we put into the cows. So those are the main things in terms of feeding. Like management, it's really more a case of, if I've got the right sort of cow to do it in the first place. The other thing that they've started talking about, you can see in our slide there, there's 3 rings in the bottom right hand corner, and those are our slurry towers. So a lot of talk now about whether we should be covering those and collecting and stopping the gases escape. And they said the government, this comes back down to the government again. They said, right, by the end of 2023, they wanted every slurry store covered. So we spoke to a guy that supplies slurry stores. He said even if they'd started tomorrow, it would take until 2030 before they even got close to being able to cover all the ones in the UK. So it's this disconnect between what they let's go and do this, and then what's actually practicable out on farm. So things like that are things that we're starting to look at. We've got, over this next year or two, our slurry handling is something that we're going to be paying a lot more attention to, and can we do a better way? And can we, obviously we had a huge spike in fertilizer prices, and we share, with our maize, the farm that we were with that grows our maize, he takes a lot of our FYM, which used to be a waste product. Now suddenly it becomes a valuable product. So it's a case of how best can we utilize that to grow our grass and grow his maize. So
I didn't have this question down there before, but where do you see yourself in 10 years' time in terms of your whole farming enterprise, but also from a carbon perspective as well? I mean, I suppose I get the impression from the conversations we've had that maybe in 10 years' time it's all kind of be one in the same. They're not going to be, I do this to make profit and I do this to minimize my carbon. Do you think that's what the picture will look like?
Yeah,
all the guys kind of merge together.
I think so. It makes sense to do that. So actually, no, in our government, it probably won't be then. They'll do the opposite of what makes sense. I think, the 10-year plan would be, it's evolution, not revolution, in terms of, we do a good job of getting milk out of those cows. It's incremental now. It's, but I don't want that next litre. It's always, your next litre is the most expensive one you produce with your cow. So I don't want it to be at the cost of profit in terms of getting more production out. But that's a key part of me. You know, if I can get more milk out of the same or less cows, that has a massive impact on my carbon footprint. That drives it. But, you know, and that's where I struggle sometimes with seeing, you know, where we have neighbours that are on a grass system, how they can compete with our cows. Because I've seen the difference we've made in 3 or 4 years in terms of a similar system and getting a lot of more production out of fewer cows. What an impact that's had on our bottom line. Whereas you think a grass boy, you know, the guy down there wouldn't be getting half the litres per cow. So he's going to be under a lot of pressure under that system if it's truly calculated correctly. So I think it's a case of more of the same on terms of breeding goals and trying to slowly improve those things. You just don't need, like we've seen now in Holland, where the government comes in with huge strapping new rules and then, you know, wonder why the farmers are up in arms about it, because farms can't change that quickly. And that's why clearer guidance earlier on helps, but it's just not forthcoming in our governments. And looking around the world, I don't think we're that different to a lot of other countries out there. As Sri Lanka is the great example of why not to go fully, you know, they went fully organic, and there are food riots. Aren't we only ever we're 3 meals away from chaos? I think I was told. So if people get hungry, they don't care anymore about, you know, the carbon footprint, or they just worry where their next meal comes from. So population is still growing, land is still getting less. So those are important things to think about as a farmer.
So you're not part of the union anymore.
Correct.
So, you know, over the English Channel,
yeah,
you know, it's fair to assume that the government's going to have a little more of an impact on how farmers have to approach carbon. You guys are a lot more like us. What's gonna be the thing? What's gonna be the thing that drags the non-believer into this space? Do you think it'll be the milk buyer? Do you think it'll be the bank? You know, who's gonna? Because the government's probably, I mean, they'll do a few little things, but you know, your government, our government, hey, you know, they're all kind of the same. But is it the consumer that's going to drag people into this space?
I think it's the milk buyer. You know, the process of that they do a very good job of telling the customer what he or she thinks they want, and they have a lot of, you know, for the UK they have a lot of power in terms of how food is made and where it comes from. Now, you could argue it's too much, and I would, but it's that, you know, that's the situation we've got. So if the milk buyer tells me tomorrow that you're going to have to do this, and if I haven't got an alternative contract, that tends to be where it comes from. It's interesting how the messages had been fairly consistent for the last couple of years about the way all the milk buyers were going, and then suddenly this shortage of milk comes along, and it's every man for themselves, and they're all jumping ship and going a different way. So they have an awful lot of power, but I wouldn't say they always get it right by any, you know, and certainly not. So it's the robustness and the ability for the farmer to be able to adapt to what these different messages are. I think we still have a high percentage of farms that sell up every year in the UK, and it's been fairly consistent for the last 25 years, and that's not going to change. So farms get very, very big, or they try and do their own thing a little bit, and that's not an easy route either. The governments, I don't know, they're just worrying about their next vote. So, you know, we were already seeing, you know, we've got a party, you know, changed in the UK at the moment, and both of the, you know, the prime candidates, if you like, are promising things that a few weeks ago they were speaking completely opposite to. So it's it's very difficult to plan your business model on expecting what the government's going to do if they, you know, even within the same government, they have such different ideas. It's a lot of swearing going on.
So let's just maybe wrap this up, I think, mate. It's been really good so far, but I want to go back into history as a sire analyst, and I've got a couple of questions. I'm sort of deciding in my head which is the right one to ask. If you could have your time over again, this is not the one that I put in the questions either. If you could have your time over again as a sire analyst, what would you change?
That's a tough. That's like an interview question, isn't it? If I could have,
oh, it's not that crappy, is it?
I would have. I think I should have done a better job of talking to sales guys. You know what? I wouldn't change many of the bulls that I bought. You know, people say, well, you know, that I'd love to have only bought the successes and not the failures. But when I was buying, you know, pre-genomic days, I was still happy with every decision I made and why I made it. I know what I would change. I would have been more aggressive with genomics at the start. Yeah, because ABS at the time, we were in a fantastic place as a stud. We had a very, very strong stud with loads of second crop bulls. And this genomics had come along and everyone was jumping on. And I don't think as a company we were aggressive enough, fast enough, because we were thinking, well, our farmers all around the world tell us they want reliability. And people still do say that, but they buy the highest bull. And it's like the consumer. I want the lowest carbon footprint, but I'm going to buy the cheapest product. So it's you know, that would be, if I had my time ever again, I'd have been more aggressive right at the start. We were aggressive, but we took too long to get aggressive enough.
And so,
yeah,
just finally, of all the bulls that you bought, which one's your favourite?
There's a bull. In fact, it might be in that picture behind me. This bull down here, Laurel Hill Classic. So it was a bull that when Oman came along, Oman for me was the saviour of the Holstein breed in many parts of Europe, because he was exactly what the breed needed. And all the purists told me he was an absolute disaster. But that bull in one cross, but protein, fertility, rough, tough cows that just didn't give a crap about people. They just wanted to survive. And I love that in a cow. I love cows that just don't give up. You know, when you get a downer cow and you see in the eyes from that first moment, she's never going to get up. Omans just didn't give a crap, and they got up. And we bought some Oman sons, and I kept buying them. And I remember being told I wasn't to buy any more Oman sons because we got all the best ones. And I went out and bought this guy, and I just didn't tell anybody about him until he turned up and stood. I've always been a big believer in plead forgiveness rather than ask permission. And this bugger, he just quietly went to the top of the charts in the UK. And it goes back to, if you picked him on, you wouldn't even look at him on type. But he was the #1 daughter fertility bull, and combination with kilos of protein and survivability mastitis level was just, you know, fantastic. And I'm milking classics here now that there'll be 5th calvers, and they've aged better than you know, this terrible type bull, which, you know, you look at the linear, you wouldn't even look at him. They just left cows that just didn't care and just survived and made people a lot of money. And that for me, you know, I loved having the fancy show bulls that everyone got excited about. But at the end of the day, I just wanted to leave bulls behind that made farmers more money. and he was the epitome of what I tried to do.
Well, I think that's a good place to wind this up, mate. I would think that you've given a lot of people some food for thought tonight, on a number of things. So I really appreciate your time. I know we're lucky we can go and actually we can all go and watch the Com Games, which is just down the road from you.
Yeah.
And watch the Australians win more gold medals, which is
Yes.
which is fun. It's more
It's
fun.
easy for you guys.
It's more fun than watching the rugby at the moment. So on that note, I'd just like to thank you, mate, and it's been really, really good, and appreciate your time. And thanks to everybody who's online with us tonight. And I hope you all got something out of it.
Thank you.